The content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood can leave you spellbound and envious. But there's a darker side to the golden age of Hollywood that left scandalous marks on the silver screen. We are going to dig deep with our guest, Joan Renner, with her new book of Monsters and Movie Stars, The Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood. So let's roll out the red carpet and the Tommy gun, folks. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I'm your host, Winnie Schrader, and yes, I've been kind of gone for a few weeks. I was in the hospital, and I want to thank everybody for all the outpouring love and affection of, recovery, speedy recoveries, just to get well, and all the light and love and healing that you sent me. It is a long road. I have been, obviously, you all know that I deal with many health issues. Autoimmune diseases are not easy to diagnose and deal with. So it is a process. But I'm back and I'm ready to just get into it. And I have a wonderful, wonderful guest for you, Joan Renner tonight. She is the author of Monsters and Movie Stars, The Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood. Now, with that being said, I would like to introduce you to our special guest, Joan Renner. Welcome to the show, Joan.
Thanks, Winnie. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you're like a renowned author. You're like an investigative historian. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I love
Okay.
history. I love it.
Mhm. Yeah, I do too. I'm a huge history buff. And so but you focus like on 20th century crimes, like stuff that's happened, basically from the 1900s to now. Uh, and you kind of focused on Los Angeles and Hollywood. What was kind of intriguing about that particular era and location, I guess you could say? Was it kind of just the glitz and glam of Hollywood and the darker side, or was there something that intrigued you to follow that and keep going and digging deep into the dark nether regions of the golden age of Hollywood?
Well, all of that really. I think the book that contains stories that start 1919. It goes 1919 to 1939, which perfectly bookends for Los Angeles. Um, Prohibition, some really amazingly devious political scandals, and that kind of thing. So it's this really outlaw period in Los Angeles. And for me, living in I did live in Los Angeles. I moved a little bit further south, but for me, Los Angeles crime has always had sort of a cinematic quality that doesn't really
Hmm.
seem to exist. Every place seems to have crimes that fit where it is.
Yeah.
If you're in a cold area, where it snows, crimes have to take into account because criminals have to take those things into account. Is there going to be 6 feet of snow today? Maybe I can't go out and rob anyone. So, but in Los Angeles, the
Hmm.
weather's usually pretty nice. Crime is all around the clock and all around the calendar. And it's always
Hmm.
been that way. But it does. I think the influence of Hollywood, really from the 1910s onward, has influenced crime, maybe not making people copycat things they've seen in the movies, but there always
Mhm.
seems to me like there's a real like again a cinematic quality to it. You can, I mean, if you go, that's one thing about LA. If you go to any Starbucks, you can see about 4 people on their computers writing a screenplay. I mean,
Oh, wow.
that's
This
just
is
what's going
everywhere.
on. Yeah, they're either cutting your hair, selling you real estate, or writing a screenplay. That's how it goes. And it's just really interesting to me. So when I decided to do this book, I wanted to start with a period that's always fascinated me, and this would be
Mhm.
it. And I start in 1919 with a criminal couple who predate Bonnie and Clyde, but were actually far more deadly than
Ooh,
Bonnie and
let's get
Clyde.
into that story. That sounds intriguing. So we have the Bonnie and Clyde type story. So let's dig into that story. Who are we talking about? What two perpetrators do we got with this one?
Well, we have Marie, and we have, what is his name? What? Let me
I'm
just
the
look
same
it
way.
up.
Don't worry about.
No, I for some reason everything leaves my mind as soon as I get started doing something, but um it's Dale Jones and Marie Solano. And
Okay.
Dale Dale was just like, he's one of those guys that was just bad from the jump, you know? Like,
Hmm.
I think he came out of the womb ready to commit crimes, and
Right.
he did. I mean, he was like, as a kid, he and another friend used to steal stuff off train cars because they lived close to it. I
Uh-huh.
think he lived in Kansas City, somewhere around there, and he lived close to some trains. And he and a friend would steal stuff. Well, they got so good at it that they started taking orders. Well, we'll steal this,
Hmm.
this, and this for you. And he's making money, hand over fist, and he's maybe 11 years old. So
Wow.
yeah, he had nowhere to go but, like, you know, into criminality from there on, and it just not
Right.
could not control him, and he was with a gang for quite a while, and they cut a pretty wide swath across the Midwest. They committed bank robberies, they killed
Hmm.
some members of law enforcement. They were a violent and vicious gang, but he really met his match when he met a California girl,
Hmm.
Marie or Margie Solano, and the 2 of them were just, uh, they
Tearing
completed
it
each
up.
other. Yeah, they
Oh,
just
okay.
completed
And
each other. They really did. I mean,
oh,
I think she was more violent than he even, but
really?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh,
That's
yeah.
kind of odd as a woman
It
being more
is.
violent than the man. That's
It
not
is.
normal.
It no, she was there was nothing about her that was normal. Um,
Okay.
and when they finally fled, they committed a couple of robberies in Denver. I believe they killed a police officer in Denver, and they fled back to LA where Margie had family.
Hmm.
And so they were going to hide out. They were hiding out in the hills somewhere and north of Los Angeles. And they they had some money. I mean, they're at this point, they're probably 19, maybe 19
That
and 20.
young
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
doing that? Oh my
Mhm,
goodness.
mhm. And they had money, and because they're basically kids without any sense, they
Yeah, no
spend it.
direction.
They just, if they have it, they spend it. And so they rented a house and they furnished part of it. They bought like a Victrola because this is 1919.
Yeah.
They bought some furnishings for the house. They stole a puppy. I don't know why they paid for the furnishings and stole a dog, but they did. And so they were kind of hiding out. I think they were just sort of waiting for things to cool down. But
Um,
once you've killed somebody in law enforcement, it never cools down. You can just forget about
no.
it right there. And
Mm-mm.
so they were being tracked on a couple of private detective agencies were tracking them, and Nick Harris being one. Nick Harris worked a lot with police as
Mhm.
even though he had a private, he's a private detective. He worked a lot with police, and Nick
Mhm.
Harris was on their trail. Um, PD from Colorado was on their trail. LA was on their trail because they figured they're probably here, but we just haven't been able to find them. They finally get a
Mhm.
tip that they were spotted, and they had a routine. Dale and Margie would go to this gas station, gas up their car, maybe get a snack, whatever. about the same time every day, and they were hiding out up in the hills.
Okay.
So one day they come down and some Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department deputies, a couple of them, two of them are waiting at this gas station. They're sort of back behind, sort of concealed. And they see the car, and Dale and Margie are career criminals, so they know they do a little bit of a sweep before they pull in.
Mhm.
They're looking because they know they're wanted, so they're looking. They pull into the gas station. Dale goes in to get a snack, do whatever business he is, leaves Margie in the car. Um, the two deputies come out from hiding, basically, and just say, it's over. And
Yeah.
Dale's like, "You've got me." Only no, they start shooting. Margie immediately starts shooting. They had an arsenal in the car. She was able to
Yeah.
just pull a weapon out from under the seat and start shooting. And it was one of the officers was killed. And there it's just like this they're 19 and
Yeah.
20 years old, and this is how they lived, and it's just amazing to me. So that's the story that really kind of kicks it all off, because I'm always
Mhm.
fascinated with the dynamics of relationships of criminal couples like Bonnie and Clyde, or like any of
Mhm.
them that like how one person committing a crime, but a couple, how do you get that? Where do you get that? You know?
Right, and then another thing that's always fascinated me too is, like, especially them being so young, it's like,
Oh,
why would you wanna live like that? You're always in hiding, you're always looking over your shoulder, whether it's law enforcement or another mob that wants to put a hit on you.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, why would
Yeah.
you wanna live with that kinda chaos and anxiety? I I would need to be on so much medication if
Oh god,
I were
you and
oh,
me, but the thing is that, like a lot of things, adrenaline is a high, you know?
yeah,
And they
that
were
is true.
also they were also doing drugs. They were both
Mhm.
addicts by that time, and they liked the excitement. Like when they were escaping from one of their jobs, um, Margie's in the back of the car shooting at police. So she had no hesitation. She had no hesitation. In fact, it was likely a bullet from her gun that killed the deputy at the gas station. um,
Okay.
I have it. I don't know if I put it in the book, but I have it on good authority. I talked to some people who were alive then, way back in the day. And apparently the deputy who survived, um, Dale, I think, was already dead by I think part of his head was just gone. So
Mhm.
he's dead. Margie was still breathing, but she was not going to survive.
Yeah.
Um, what I was told is that the deputy came up to where she was at the car and just put a round in her chest and killed her.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when he was asked about this, would not have been shocking at the time, particularly.
Yeah.
And so he just put a round in her chest. She's gone. And when he was talking about it later, they said, why didn't you, put put a round in her head? And he said, I couldn't do that to a woman.
Oh, that's
He
very
couldn't.
intense.
That's very t
Oh,
it's very
it
touching.
is. It is touching that he didn't wanna put a bullet oh, he
Nope,
didn't wanna
nope.
mess with
Yeah,
her
I think
face.
maybe he's thinking open casket at her I don't know, but he's like, for whatever reason, that was a line he couldn't cross. He could he could put her down like he would any other,
Yeah.
creature that was
And
suffering, but he could
he
not put one in her face.
yeah, and putting s and honestly, when things are like by putting like, if you have, like, a direct gunshot in the face or something like that, it's usually means it's kind of personal, you know what I mean?
Very
Like, they
much.
really they just wanna get you, and,
Yeah.
he knew that he had to put her down because those 2, I mean, granted, I mean, I don't like the death penalty, but I understand it.
I do
Be
too, yeah. The only what I don't like is I never, because I mean, I live in California, and
Mhm.
and so if they execute someone, It's in my name. I'm a citizen of the state of California. I don't want an innocent person executed on my watch, and that's the
Right.
problem I have with it. There are people I probably would have gleefully, put the needle in their arm myself, like Richard
Mhm.
Ramirez, for instance. There are a lot of them that really, no problem. Lawrence Bittaker, he'll be in a future book. Um, you
Ooh,
know,
we'll have to have
yeah.
her back.
Oh, Bittaker, his nickname was Pliers Bittaker. You can only imagine. He was a serial killer
Yeah.
active in the 1980s, an absolutely vile human being. He started he didn't die all that many years ago. He died on death row. Um, and when he was initially arrested, even though this story is not in the book, but it's interesting. Um, when he was arrested, he was typical serial killer swagger,
Yeah.
like, I'm a rock star, I'm famous, I'm Pliers
Mhm.
Bittaker. So other people who are also probably just as sick as he is, only they don't act on it. People would send him things like um, reproductions, copies made of some of his victims' death certificates, and he would autograph them, Pliers Bittaker, and return them in the mail. So
Oh my god.
this is how bad this guy. But other people are
Uh,
sending him this stuff. What is wrong with people? So
I don't know. I don't know. I
seriously,
love true crime, but I don't need memorabilia or
no,
evidence
it's
pieces. No.
murderbelia, as it is known.
Yeah,
So
I
he
know.
so he's doing this. So anyway, as he gets a little older, he's starting.
Mhm.
He's been in jail for a few decades. He's starting to get a little older. He starts to face his mortality. Interestingly, the Pliers Bittaker moniker just kind of fades. No more autographs or signatures on his victims, death
Mhm.
certificates or whatever. And I read an interview with him that he gave to a San Francisco newspaper, I think, not that long before he died, and he was a frightened man. And he should have been. If there's a hereafter, oh boy, he's turning
Mhm.
right now in a slow spit somewhere, and it started to bother him because that seems to be typical of serial killers. They don't feel
Mhm.
any empathy for anyone else, but when it comes to
Just for
them,
themselves.
they're afraid to die. They don't want to die. Richard Ramirez was kind of the same way. He wanted to feel, the Night Stalker. He wanted to feel that power, and there were all these conspiracy theories before he passed away several years ago now, um, that he was being kept from people, that he wasn't allowed to see people, wasn't allowed to see people. That was absolutely untrue. He didn't want to see people because he was dying of B-cell lymphoma, and he
Wow.
was a shadow of his former self, and he didn't want anyone to see him as weak or anything but, the killer, the monster that he, wanted people to fear. No one would have
Yeah.
feared him on a hospital bed waiting to die.
Looking frail. Yeah, looking
Uh-huh.
frail and like yeah, I know
So it
exactly
always
what you
kind of
mean.
confuses me when people say, "Oh, he was," these conspiracy, "Oh, he was kept from visit." No, honey, you got that wrong. He didn't want people to see him in a weakened state. But
Right? And that's kind of and that is kind of the glamour of Hollywood and LA.
yes,
Like they
yeah.
want don't want people to see them at their worst.
No,
So it's
no.
like, when you take like these old Hollywood movies and Hollywood starlets and stars and you mix like seedy underground stuff like the mafia, and then it's like and I don't know how the mafia does this or used to do it, but it's almost like they use like psychology to get their web into like, let's say, Cagney or
Ah,
Gordon
yes.
Ramsay. Okay, like they kind of like intertwine themselves into that society, and then all of a sudden that society is beholden to the mafia.
Mhm.
Like, what happened? And I know, and I'm sure this probably happened back then. I'm not sure how money laundering was back in the prohibition days, but I know the mafia likes to hide their money and launder it through businesses. Now, did
Yeah.
they do that with some of the movies, or like did they
Oh,
invest in MGM
I'll tell
and
you,
things like that?
there's something, well, there's lots of unusual things about LA crime. Um,
Mhm.
one of the things about LA during that period, and it was really true in the 20s and 30s, um, we never really had a mob presence in the same way that, say, New York or Chicago or Cleveland or Kansas City did. Detroit, it was different. It was top down. It came from City Hall. City Hall was where the corruption started, and then they
Okay.
sort of divvied up, you know, sections of the city to various gambling, consortiums or prostitution. But it wasn't like mob moves in, bribes city officials. It was the other way around, which is really kind of unique. And so we had
Wow,
this
that
really
is.
corrupt government. uh, a few of our mayors were just unbelievably corrupt. In fact, when my book ends in 1939, the year before that, the Los Angeles mayor, Frank Shaw, was the first mayor, I think, in the US to be recalled. And it's
Oh.
because of corruption he was recalled. So, it's really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, but the studios, when if you really want to, and this is, I mean, everything I say is my opinion, unless I'm saying
Mhm.
it's historical and I can back it up. This is my opinion. My opinion is that um, the real corrupt people, that City Hall was corrupt, make no mistake. But once the movies came in and there were studio moguls, it flipped the script. And if you want to see what the mob looked like, look at old MGM. Look at some of the studio heads. MGM, for instance, this is appalling. And I don't think most people know this. MGM had its own police force. And I don't mean rent a cop. I mean police force with police powers like LAPD, or the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it was headed by
Hmm.
a guy named Whitey Hendry. And Hendry had a price, I think. And so um a lot of things that happened on Hendry's watch were whitewashed or you know buried, and it's a
Mhm.
lot of power for people to have, a lot of power
Right.
for people to have. So I think the real corrupt entity in that day and age were definitely the studios. They had the money, and
Yep.
they could afford to pay for a story that they wanted to be told and squash anything they didn't, and they did. you know
Yeah, and you said you have a MGM story,
I
an
do.
actress. What's that story about? What happened at MGM?
Okay, the woman's name is Patricia Douglas. I'm she is deceased now, but I'll tell you, um, she was just a badass. There's no
Really?
other way to put, yeah, because I think I consider her the godmother of the Me Too movement. She was,
Really?
yeah, she was maybe, I think she was still a teenager. She's working. This is during the Depression, so if you can get any kind of a job, consider yourself lucky, because most
Yeah.
people were out of work. She was employed as an extra, and
Okay.
she gets a call, and with a bunch of other young women, most of them underage, most of them were minors. Um,
Mhm.
they get a call. They come to the studio. They think they're going to go out on, be extras in a shoot, because some of them are in cowgirl outfits and some of them are in Native American outfits, and they think they're going out. Where they really are headed is to a private party for MGM salesmen across the country, people who get those
Mhm.
movies into the theaters and that. And so they had all these guys on a train that came out. All these guys have been drinking on the train before it ever hit LA,
Mm.
and
Oh
they're
gosh.
welcomed by Hollywood stars, and they're made to feel special. They consider themselves very special. They're wined
Mhm.
and dined, and then you know, and then I think it was Louis B. Mayer said, these beautiful young girls here, they're here, basically they're here to serve you. So the guys interpreted that pretty literally, and there was a
Mhm.
huge party out at this ranch location, and it got it got pretty much out of control, because there were, I forget how many cases of liquor and everything else. And
Oh, I'm sure.
there was this one sales guy, and he had his eye on Patricia Douglas, this young woman, and he wanted her to dance, and she she's like, he was creepy. I've seen pictures of him. She was right, he was creepy, and she went he looked kind of like, I don't know, kind of like if a toad and a gargoyle mated, kind of like that. Not a pleasant looking guy.
Oh,
S
no, a
No,
troll.
it's horrible. So, anyway,
Ugh,
so she heads for the ladies' room, and she said, "Look, I've got a guy sticking to me. I can't get rid of him." And she hung
uh-huh,
out in the restroom for a little while. She comes back out, and at this point, I think one of those salesmen holds her down while this gargoyle is pouring liquor down her throat. Um,
ugh,
she's not a drinker. She's not
uh-huh,
accustomed to that. So she goes out and she goes outside of the building to get some fresh air, and I think she's looking for a way to get the heck out of there anyway,
yeah,
if there's some way she can find a way out, because I think they were brought in on buses, so she was just looking for anything. And she
yeah,
goes outside to get that breath of fresh air. He follows her out, and he smacks her around, he rapes her, um, and no one did a thing about it. No one did a thing about it. And she complained, and at first some of the people had her back. They said, "Yeah, we saw
mhm,
this and we saw that, she's telling the truth." Well, then they must have gotten the memo that said, "Hey, do you like working for MGM? Because if you do, you might want to change
mhm.
your story." And boy, stories started
Oh,
changing so fast.
no.
So she's left to just twist in the wind. And
Oh,
she's
God.
going forward with all this, and it any chance she had at a career in the movies is just gone. And
Yeah.
she persisted. She sued, and she was dragged through the mud, and it was awful the way that she was treated and everything. And it really did. She was a pretty sensitive, and I think her mom sold her out. I think her mom, you know, took money, and
Oh,
I
God.
think I don't know if she bought a liquor store or some race horses. She did some, and
Mhm.
she sells her own child out. I mean, this happens in Hollywood. It's
Yeah,
classic Hollywood story,
Christians.
I'm afraid. Yeah, the stage mother, whatever. But
It's disgusting that those family especially reality show like the Kardashians, she
oh,
sold their own daughter out,
oh,
and, obviously, that kind of apparently being famous completely throws every moral instinct you have out, and and I give Patricia some, lots of credit. She gets the Rosie the Riveter award for me
oh,
because she kept to her guns. She stuck to her story whether people were gonna believe her or not.
yep,
Now, back then, that was unheard of. Women had
absolutely
to
right.
just take it and shut up.
Yep, yep,
Now,
and she refused.
today and today, I mean, it's a lot easier for women, not quite, but it is a lot
No.
easier for us to come forward, but we're still called liars,
Oh, yeah.
who
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
gain
We made
money.
it up, or, yeah, we're trying to
Yeah.
extort money from them or whatever. And, and in Hollywood, when you think of the golden age, I know I do. When I first think of the golden age, I think, you know, MGM musicals and and Judy Garland and I mean all these,
Yep.
like all these they always seem so happy and I'll tell you what, I mean, they had contracts that dictated every aspect of their life. It
Mhm.
If they gained 2 pounds, if they wanted kids and the studio said no, too bad, no kids for you.
I know.
If you met the love of your life and you wanna get married and the studio didn't approve, no, too bad for you. And so these contracts, the whole studio system just they were like indentured slaves. They
I
really had
know.
they really had not much freedom, and you either played that game their way or boy, they shut you out big time. And I think Patricia was just a phenomenal human being. She was interviewed for a documentary about her story. I don't know if it's been
Mhm.
a decade ago or something like that, but it's called Girl 27, like I called the story. And the reason for the Girl 27 is because she was number 27 on the list of, they had girls' names and they checked them off. She was number 27.
Kinda like a call sheet type of thing where
Yeah,
you're saying,
exactly
"Okay,
correct.
gotcha."
Yeah, and
Okay.
and I just think she was so brave. I really have a lot of admiration for anyone today, then, whenever, who's, speaks, like they said, speak truth to power. It's not easy to do.
Mm-mm, no, it's not. And it almost seems like these studios were running the studios as if they were a mafia family. I mean, you have like your head, and you're
Mhm.
going to do what they say you're going to do. Now, in the mob, if you do anything against them, they just bump you off. Well, in Hollywood, they just kill your career. So, I
Yeah.
can see the contrast. So, they obviously, these studios had influence somewhere to
Oh,
have kind of pull and power to keep these people under their thumbs.
well, when MGM has its own police force, one of the stories in the book is about the death of the supposed suicide of Paul Byrne, who was briefly
Oh,
married to the actress Jean Harlow. And
okay.
it was considered a suicide for the longest time. Why? Because MGM got in there and took care of the scene before the cops
Mhm.
ever even arrived. So, interestingly, I think it was in the 90s, a photograph that was taken at the time, a roll of photographs. Um, I forget who the guy was who took the photos, but um, the scene was staged. That there was,
Okay.
there was a gun nearby and stuff, so it looked like a suicide. He was naked when he was found. It looked like there was he looked like a suicide on the face of it, and
Mhm.
that's how it was pitched as a suicide. People who knew him said, "No way, this isn't," but it went that way for many decades until um, one of the photographs that was taken at the scene that day surfaced. I think probably after the photographer died or something, it became available. And sure enough, there was no gun there. He didn't shoot himself.
Oh.
Somebody else did. And so people think it might have been his former common law wife, who
Mhm.
supposedly had some issues. She did commit suicide, I think, within a day or something of his death. She was in San
Okay.
Francisco. She may have come down to see him. He She had mental issues. He paid for her care. He was a decent man, and
Mhm.
his reputation just got dragged through the mud. And Harlow, to her credit, never said anything bad about him, no matter what anyone else said. She just
Yeah.
refused to talk. And I think it was really difficult for her to stay quiet because I believe she understood that the truth was different from the story that was being told. So, yeah,
Right.
the studios, just like the mafia, had a lot of power. Maybe that's why Bugsy Siegel wanted to be in the movies.
Oh, well, speaking of Bugsy Siegel, we're gonna take a quick break. But, my husband is a huge Cagney fan. And, of course, we have Cagney's been in many mob movies, but there's a
Yes.
story where he was almost bumped off by the mob. So we're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be back with Joan Renner with her book of Monsters and Movie Stars. I can just insert the commercial later. Well,
Okay. Yeah,
I
you
just don't know
tell this
what I wanna do.
yeah, you tell the Cagney story because you know more about it than me.
Yeah. Well, he says he was in a, I just kinda, like, copied and pasted, okay. Yeah, I'll just read what I have on here and
Yeah, yeah,
kinda
do it
riff
because
off
I
of it.
yeah, 'cause I there's a couple of stories about actors, that are interesting, but again, the studios, if they were a property worth a lot of money, they protected them.
Oh, I know. It's crazy. I don't that's why I'm thinking, I'm like, I'm wondering if the mob was using these studios to launder their money through it and getting it back on the back end. You know what I mean?
Well, I
'Cause
think I think
that's
that's entirely likely, and you kinda wonder sometimes where the financing from movies where it originates, you know?
yeah.
It's always follow the money, always.
Always, and whoever is on the receiving end of it, you're beholden to that person, the
Oh,
studio, the mob.
yeah,
So,
never take
that's
a dime from anybody that yeah.
no, I would if Bugsy Siegel came up to me and handed me $1, I'd be like, "You
Uh,
keep it."
thank you.
I
I'm good.
yeah. Alright, okay, so we'll come back and we'll go from there, okay? I'll just count down to 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we're back. Now, I alluded to the story of Cagney almost getting bumped off by the mob. Now, my husband Dave, we all know, loves Cagney, and we sit and watch Cagney movies all the time. Great mobster. He was a very physical actor. I loved Cagney. But in real life, he had a brush with the mob, and this is the story. Says Cagney was an iconic Irish American actor, gangster in Hollywood. However, in real life, he had a brush with the mob, who also threatened to kill him. But when he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which I'm assuming probably had a lot of financial investments from Bugsy Siegel, people like he rejected any advances the mob was trying to make in Hollywood. So he was like, "No, we play mobsters. We don't need real mobsters here." Well, that didn't sit well with Bugsy and Meyer Lansky and stuff. So George Rath, who has been in movies with Cagney, he had to step in because he was like a real mobster, a real thug. I don't think he was a made guy, but he
No.
like really he was close with Bugsy Siegel.
Yeah, I
And
think they grew up in the same neighborhood.
yeah, and I'm wondering if he used George as kind of an ear in Hollywood, and I'm assuming he probably just,
Yeah.
"George, you gotta get me in the movies. You gotta get me in," but yeah, he almost bumped off Cagney because he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Now, do you with the Screen Actors Guild, what would be the cause of somebody wanting to bump off Cagney because he's the president of the Screen Actors Guild? What exactly is the Screen Actors Guild? Do you know? I don't
Well,
even know. I just know it's a thing.
yeah, it's basically a union. It's a guild, like
Okay.
the old, like the old-fashioned English, British guilds. We have people in them that are, say they're they make horseshoes or something, or there's a guild for doing some art thing. It's the same kind of thing. It's like a union, only they say guild because it sounds better, I think. But
Sounds
um,
fancier.
it does. And I think that's the basic thing, is that they provide some representation for you. And there, because even especially now, I mean, getting into any of the guilds or unions is really, really difficult. It's always been. A lot of times you have to, you have to be related to somebody who can bring you in, that sort of
Uh-huh.
stuff, to like if you're going to apprentice something. The same thing as Screen Actors Guild. How they could have crossed someone, I don't know, like we were talking about
Well,
on the break, we're
yeah.
talking about follow the money. There
Yep.
has to have been some financial thing where maybe like Ben Siegel really wanted to be in the movies. And to be honest, I mean, he was really not a nice guy, but he was not a gargoyle. He was a nice looking guy. And I think he
Mhm.
could have been in the movies. What I don't know if that he had any talent. My guess is no, but
Mhm.
he certainly had the looks for it. And so maybe someone crossed him. He had a hair trigger temper. And so,
Mhm.
and there were a lot of guys like that floating around Hollywood in the 30s and in the 40s, and so I think it must have been some money thing behind the scenes, where somebody
Yeah.
either paid something and didn't feel like they'd gotten value for what they paid for, something like that. But there's so
Mhm.
many possibilities. It's really an intriguing story. I think I'm going to have to dive into it at some point and see if I can
Yes.
find
Well,
out, because
I
I love it.
yeah, well, and it's not the first time the mob has been involved with a union. I mean, all through the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, the mob, they were running unions because
Oh yeah.
that's kind of how they switched over from all the crime and the Tommy guns of the 20s, 30s, and 40s and stuff. They kind of transitioned into like looking like a blue collar type of not business, but culture
Yeah.
by running unions and stuff. So
Yeah.
I can see where they were trying to interfere with the Screen Actors Guild, and that's why Cagney was like, no, because he knew that if they got involved, they were taking control.
Oh, and they would, and they did try to take control a couple times of the movie business, and
Mhm.
it's just, it's not surprising, because there were guys the studios used, they called them fixers, and it was exactly like it sounds. If there was some problem or some issue, fixers were everything from guys who could legitimately kind of solve a problem to leg breakers, you know? And
Yeah,
so
how
they
did that go?
ran the gamut. So, so so that, the studios had fixers, and that way it protected the bosses because there was this layer between them. They could always
Right.
say, "Well, I don't know, what's going on," when of course
Uh,
I'm sure they did. But yeah, there was always this sort of like symbiosis maybe between, you know, the crooks and the legal crooks in
right.
the movie business. I mean, they sort of had, because I mean, they were all after the same thing, making more money than they ever needed in their lifetime.
Right, and it was by any means necessary. I mean,
Yeah,
they would
yeah.
starve they would make all these young starlets starve so they can get a few extra $1,000 so they looked good on the screen. I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, it's totally ridiculous.
Now, are there any other stories in your book that you feel that are not as known that you think are very
Oh,
prevalent and things like that?
yeah. Well, there's a couple of them.
Mhm.
One of the craziest stories that I can think of that
Oh,
sort of was maybe influenced a little bit by Hollywood was a guy named Robert James. Robert James wanted to kill his wife. And
oh,
in order to do this, he didn't really want to be married, and she was also pregnant. And he didn't want to be a dad. And so he wanted to kill her. And I think this was in 1934, 35. I think he'd seen the movie Cleopatra with Claudette Colbert. And the Cleopatra
okay.
story, she takes the asp, the snake, and she holds
Mhm.
it to her chest, and it bites her, and she dies this graceful, wonderful death.
Of
And
course.
it's
Hollywood death.
a total Hollywood death. Well, I think Robert James, no genius, kind of thought, well, okay, how do we make this happen here? Well, Southern California had some really weird things. They had snake farms for real. Don't
Mhm.
ask me why. I'm not really sure why. They had snake farms, crocodile farms, alligator farms, what all this weird stuff. Don't ask. But some little bell went off in his tiny brain, and he thought, aha, diamondback rattlesnakes, right? Venomous,
Oh,
poisonous diamondback rattlesnakes. So he determined that he was going to kill her with rattlesnakes. The idea occurred to him that he was going to use black widow spiders, but he abandoned that idea. Why, I'm not really sure. For the rattlesnakes, he even had and he did something that you should never do. Advice to anyone contemplating crime, although I hope nobody is, but if you are,
no.
no accomplice ever. Never. No matter how tempting it is to bring somebody else into your little world, don't do it. Because you know what? They'll rat you out in a heartbeat.
Oh,
But
yeah, canaries can sing.
oh yeah. Yep, they can sing, but they can't fly. That was a famous guy that went out a window in Chicago. But so rattlesnake James. Okay, I'm gonna bump my wife off. I'm gonna use two poisonous rattlesnakes. He had his accomplice um have a box constructed to his specifications in which he put the two snakes, which were named, by the way, Lightning and Lethal. So he had, yeah, oh yeah, you can't make this stuff up, right? That's why it's wonderful. That's why it's true crime. So he has them in the box, and he convinces his wife that, they really can't have kids right now. She needs to terminate her pregnancy. He introduces her to his accomplice as
Mhm.
Dr. Charles Hope. Dr. Charles Hope was really a short order cook and a bar fly. I mean, he was,
Oh
but
my
anyway,
god.
he introduces Dr. Charles Hope. So um, he gets her pretty tipsy, bunch of whiskey, so she's kind of like
Yeah.
loopy. Um, Straps her to the kitchen table, puts a gag over her mouth, and I'm not sure if he covered her eyes or not. Anyway, so she's strapped down on the kitchen table. She's not moving. she thinks she's gonna have an illegal operation, which is bad enough
Yeah.
for her, and, what really happens is he brings out the box with lightning and lethal in it. He takes her
Mhm.
foot and jams it in the box. They strike,
Yeah.
just like that's because 'cause
Mhm.
they're rattlesnakes, what they do,
Yep.
and then he waits, and then he waits, and then he waits some more, and she's not dying, and he's starting to
Oh,
get
no.
impatient because uh, he saw he saw Cleopatra. She's like this skinny little asp, boom, she's gone. Two pretty robust diamondback rattlesnakes, and his wife still lives. So he's waiting, waiting, watching the clock. He can't believe it. It's hours. I can't even imagine the
Oh, the
horror
pain.
that this woman was going through because after a while, I mean, it starts to it
Kill
goes
the
there,
tissue.
yeah, yeah, it's necrosis, so it starts to kill it, and you can see it getting black, but he doesn't have the patience anymore. He drags her into the bathroom and drowns her in the bathtub. Then he and his accomplice take her out to the backyard to a fish pond that he had back there and stage it to look like because she was pregnant, she must have fainted or, gotten dizzy
Oh,
and
gotcha.
was, and he
Kinda
manages
passed out and fell?
yeah, he
Mm.
manages to sell this story for a while until the fake Dr. Charles, Hope starts chatting up some guy on the next stool at a bar and says, I got involved in this thing. I don't think it's a good idea, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you
Ah,
know, they're looking at Robert James for this crime. And it it is when I said that I think LA crimes are cinematic, this one for sure, because during the trial, they brought Lightning and Lethal in. And they brought him in this,
they did?
oh, they absolutely did in this glass, box. And of course, the defense objects vigorously because they're they're hissing and they're spitting venom against the. And he's like, this is
Yeah.
going to prejudice the jury, which of course it would. But the argument on the prosecution side was, well, when you have a gun crime, they bring in the gun. If somebody stabs them, they bring in the knife.
Mhm.
These are the murder weapons, even though she actually drowned. But brings in these snakes. So Lightning and Lethal are just like they're like a sideshow in this whole
Oh,
thing.
geez.
And then one day during the trial, Lethal escapes and he slithers his way out, rattling menacingly. The courtroom erupts into screams and total chaos.
Oh,
And this guy
sounds
named
like comedy.
it's just it's just again cinematic. It's like, what? This doesn't happen in real life. So there's this guy, he's a snake handler. He has a snake farm. And actually, I think he's the one who sold Lightning and Lethal without knowing what their intended purpose was. His name was Snake Joe Houtenbrink. Okay.
Oh.
Yes. Snake
Say that
Joe.
3 times quick.
No, no way. Snake Joe's smiling. He loves snakes. You can see it on his face. He
Yeah.
loves his snakes. And so he's in the courtroom and he gets this thing somehow he sort of lassos Lethal and's holding him up in the air. Everyone's screaming and he's smiling because he's got the snake. Everything's going to be fine. So this story, I mean,
Oh.
there's just so many twists and turns to this story, and there's just no way you can make this up. Who does that? Who
Right,
does
I mean,
that?
yeah, it sounds like a Monty Python skit.
Yeah. What are you
And
doing?
you hear the Benny Hill music playing in the background, you're just
Yeah.
like, "What is happening in the courtroom?"
Why
Oh
are
my
you doing
gosh.
this? Why and how did the snake get loose? Don't know. The snake just he wanted to break out. He was getting the heck out of there. He was tired of being in that glass case. He was gone,
Well, he's like, "Hey,
and
I'm being labeled as a murder weapon. I'm outta here.
yeah,
I'm
I
not
didn't
going."
do anything except bite, and that's my job. I didn't drown her, he did. So,
Right.
no, I mean, so that
Oh,
that's one of the stories that I think is lesser known in Hollywood, in LA crime, but it's really an amazing story, and the guy Robert James is just the epitome of evil because
mhm.
he's a psychopath. He has absolutely no empathy. It's always about him always. And it's just and this isn't that's not the first wife he killed. He killed the wife before her, I think, but he the police
Really?
yeah, sadly, the police, he did it up at, um, somewhere around Pikes Peak, somewhere in Colorado, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, the police department wasn't accustomed to handling a lot of homicides, and he staged this whole thing to look like a car accident that he survived. His wife did survive, but then, gosh darn it, if she didn't drown in a bathtub.
Oh,
And but they
geez.
never could prove anything, even though, and I don't know how the cop, I don't know how he missed this. Somehow, the fact that there was a hammer on the back seat of this car didn't register with him, as you know,
Yeah.
and that the fact that the woman didn't remember anything about the, the car accident, and
Mhm.
she was supposedly driving, but somehow she ended up in the passenger seat. Eh, but they just
Yeah.
didn't look at it very hard, and he got away with that one, and, and he'd been married something like 7 or 8 times.
Oh,
They had
okay.
to look for his other wives to make sure they were all still alive.
He's still he's still trying to find that one.
He
Um,
was a
but
monster.
yeah, I mean, it's gosh. I mean, when you look at Hollywood and yeah, there are crimes that have mimicked what people have seen in Hollywood. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's I should do a show on that. That would
Oh,
be a
yeah.
very
That
interesting
would be
episode
fun. That would be really fun because I think
yeah,
that people, even if they're not directly influenced, again, there's that cinematic quality, like the snake, like lethal, running wild or slithering wild in the courtroom.
right.
I mean, this is it. It's heartbreaking and it's farce all at the same time.
Right,
And
right. And
that's just one of those things where, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. But that happens a lot, especially like in the era of this book, there was people committed crimes. Like now, you know, they're more likely to, once they started doing drive-by shootings and stuff, I lost
mhm.
interest in true crime. It's not very, because it's random. And
Yeah, there's no sense to it. It's just,
no, and
people
while it's
trying to
scary because of the randomness, it doesn't have the same, and I don't wanna sound flip here, but it doesn't have the same, people don't think it through, like, these people were they were idiots, but they did take the time to think it through in their own limited
yeah.
way of how they were gonna do it and what they were gonna do and what the outcome was gonna be, and, it's a
Mhm.
story, it has an arc, these other things are just different, and they don't make any sense to me, and so
Right.
that's why I prefer 20th century true crime. So my next book is gonna do 40 to 49 because it's such a dense period. I was gonna stretch it out a little further, but I realized that there's no way, because encompassed in this period will be the Black Dahlia and all the other, unsolved homicides of women. She was just the most famous one. Actually,
Yeah.
the centenary of her birth is Monday, the 29th of July. She would have been 100 years old had she lived that long.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know I'm very intrigued with the Black Dahlia case because there's so much like there's so many ways you could take this crime. Like this person got it. I mean, there's so many ways, but there has to be one person that was involved and how they mutilated her was very appalling. And
Yeah.
obviously there was some sicko going around or had it, there could have been a lot of other murders by the same person.
They couldn't
But
find any with
obviously,
the same MO. I mean, they looked, and that was just not possible. They couldn't find anything. I think I think where a lot of people go wrong when they look at the Black Dahlia case is, first of all, if you do all of your research online, you're looking for trouble, because a lot of
mhm,
that stuff is just, I mean, it's just like, no. She
that's
never
my current opinion.
Yeah, she never wanted to be an actress. She
Mhm,
wrote to her mother that she was doing that, but she wrote to her mother because she didn't want her to worry, I mean,
mhm,
and, she lied about a lot of stuff, she was 22 years old when she died. She lied about a lot of
mhm,
stuff, I mean, big deal, but she said that, but it wasn't true. She never wanted to be an actress. What she really wanted to be was, what a lot of women wanted to be at that time, was a wife. She wanted to get
mhm,
married, preferably to a guy in uniform. She was possibly engaged to a guy that was, a pilot, a fighter pilot. His name was Matthew
mhm.
Gordon. but he tragically died in a plane crash, literally just like a couple of weeks before the end of the war, in with Japan, because the end of
Okay.
the war had already ended in Europe. Japan had yet to surrender. He's killed in a plane crash on August 10th, and the two atom bombs, the two bombs that were dropped in Japan, one in
Mhm.
Nagasaki and one in Hiroshima. One was dropped on the 6th and the other one was dropped on the 9th. He dies the day after that. He dies in a plane crash somewhere over India. And
Mhm.
I mean, he was this far away from making it all the way through the war. He was a fighter pilot. He'd been in, like, you know, air
Yeah.
fights and everything else, and he'd lived through the war, and he made it, almost. And I could just see her. She was never the same after that. She never
Yeah.
worked another day. She had been a waitress before. Sometimes she never worked again. And I think it just shattered her dream, but her dream was never to be a Hollywood star. She wasn't a prostitute. She didn't have, this is the most absurd one of all, and I know where this rumor
Mhm.
started, that she had infantile genitalia. That's utter nonsense, of course. Um, there's just so much. The myth has overshadowed the woman. The woman
Yeah.
at the heart of the story is um, kind of a lonely, confused. If she lived today, she'd be on medication, because I think she was
Mhm.
really profoundly depressed. And I think that, she didn't know how to ask for help. A lot of people in that generation didn't know how.
Mhm.
They didn't know where to seek it. She didn't have the money for help anyway, even if she could have. And so, so this myth has supplanted the living, breathing young woman that really, had she got to live the life she wanted, we'd know nothing about her, you know?
Right. She just wanted to be that whole just have a wholesome life and,
Yeah.
and back then women did have to depend on marrying a man to make it.
Oh, you
Anyway,
absolutely did, and especially after
you know,
the war, because then you go into the 1950s and it's all, you know, you're wearing a dress and pearls to do the dishes. So,
right? And you haven't holding Tupperware parties.
uh-huh. So, I mean,
So
that's the thing, when there aren't any avenues for women to find, meaningful or work that can support them, what are
mhm.
you gonna do? But I think that was but that was the accepted norm. That was the accepted norm. You grew up, you got married, you had kids, and that was your life. And
Right. Exactly.
she wanted to marry this good-looking, you know,
Pilot.
fighter pilot. Yeah.
Right? Oh,
Excuse
what
me.
girl in the '40s didn't want a fighter pilot,
Oh,
right?
come on. I mean, I mean, one of her sisters actually did marry, later, after Elizabeth Short was already dead. She actually did. One of her sisters was doing some decoding thing, Japanese stuff, and I mean, wow.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, wow. That was yeah, during World War II they had those people that would decode those the transmissions or whatever they called them,
Yeah.
the little tickers. Yeah, I remember watching a lot of movies, a
Yeah.
lot of historical documentaries that always show that. And I
Yeah.
always thought that was fascinating too, and how um h- how how the dynamic changed during World War II. Now, and another thing, in Hollywood, are you gonna cover how Hollywood in the next book, how Hollywood dealt with World War II? I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely.
how did the men get out of it? We're definitely gonna have to have you back for that book.
Love it.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, well, and a lot of guys like Gary Cooper, I mean, he was,
Mhm,
he was in there are a lot of guys that served in different capacities. Um, After Clark Gable's wife, Carol Lombard, when she died in a plane crash, she was actually considered, I think, the first civilian war casualty in a way, because she died in that plane crash, Clark Gable was he couldn't I think he was too old to enlist in for active duty, but
mhm,
he gave of his time and his efforts to the war. A lot of people in Hollywood did. It was patriotic. The Hollywood canteen, was a
mhm,
thing only and it wasn't for officers, it was just for enlisted guys, and it was John Garfield and Betty Davis, I think, who created the Hollywood Canteen, and they had, Hollywood stars and young women who volunteered, and so that, the guys could go in, they could get coffee, donuts, they could dance with pretty girls, and it was the way that Hollywood was giving back, to
Mhm.
people who were serving in the war. And there was a lot of energy around that. And in the post-war period, there was a lot of energy that wasn't necessarily good because a lot of guys returned from the war, whether it was Europe or in the South Pacific, very damaged, and PTSD
Mhm.
wasn't a thing until I think after Vietnam. So they called it battle fatigue or whatever, but men got a raw deal because they were not encouraged. There was some help available, but they weren't really
Mhm.
encouraged to seek it. They were basically told to man up, grab your toolbox or your briefcase, and get back to work. So that's why a lot of men, when you hear interviews with some older veterans, they didn't talk about their war experiences to anybody. They kept it all
Right.
bottled up inside, and some guys dealt with it successfully, and other guys, it just ate them up inside. So there was an uptick in spousal abuse, murder, suicide, you name it, because there was a lot of people who are just so damaged from their experiences. So it's a
Right.
equally fascinating as the period in my current book. They're different, but
Yeah.
each one has a character. It's
Yeah.
about its time. It's a snapshot in time. And
Yeah.
I find
Well,
that that's why I love history.
yeah, well, we're definitely going to have you back for that book. But today we were interviewing you about Of Monsters and Movie Stars, The Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood. I will have a link in today's program
Thank you.
description where you can purchase it. Now, if you purchase it, please rate and review the book. It helps authors' books get seen more
Thank you.
by other like-minded people that love true crime. So you love the book, go ahead. It's free. It just takes you a couple minutes to type in a little review. Um, so thank you so much, Joan, for
Oh, my
being on
pleasure.
my show, and we're definitely going to have you back for that
Thank
next
you.
segment from the 40s on to what was it, 40 to 41? You
49,
said?
1940 to 1949, because that gets
Oh,
right before the war starts to, going next into the
right after.
50s, which I'll also be doing at some point later on, because there's just
Uh,
each little block of time has its
right,
own you can almost see the difference from the crimes that are
right.
committed, so
And and that's how our communities and how things get shaped, and you see those changes, crime changing, they're
it
adapting
is.
to its era and its time, and it's kind of cool to kind of chronologically put that into books
Yeah.
so people can, sorry, words is hard. uh, but
Hey,
yeah,
I
so
have the
yeah,
same
we're
problem.
definitely gonna yeah, we're definitely gonna have you back on
Thank
for
you, Winnie.
sure.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank you
much.
yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for listening, watching, and I will see you guys next week. Perfect. Oh, that was fun. I love that.
Thank you. I really
Did
had
you
a
have
good
fun?
time.
Oh, good.